a WikiVidi documentaries production. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Enjoy. Saint Patrick. Saint Patrick was a 5th century Romano-British Christian missionary and bishop in Ireland. Known as the Apostle of Ireland, he is the primary patron saint of Ireland, along with Saints Brigit of Kildare and Columba. He is also venerated in the Anglican Communion, the Old Catholic Church, and in the Eastern Orthodox Church as equal to the Apostles and Enlightener of Ireland. The dates of Patrick's life cannot be fixed with certainty, but there is broad agreement that he was active as a missionary in Ireland during the second half of the 5th century. Early medieval tradition credits him with being the first bishop of Armagh and Primate of Ireland, and they regard him as the founder of Christianity in Ireland, converting a society practicing a form of Celtic polytheism. He has been generally so regarded ever since, despite evidence of some earlier Christian presence in Ireland. According to the Confessio of Patrick, when he was about 16, he was captured by Irish pirates from his home in Britain and taken as a slave to Ireland, looking after animals. He lived there for 6 years before escaping and returning to his family. After becoming a cleric, he returned to Northern and Western Ireland. In later life, he served as a bishop, but little is known about the places where he worked. By the 7th century, he had already come to be revered as the patron saint of Ireland. St. Patrick's Day is observed on the 17th of March, the supposed date of his death. It is celebrated inside and outside Ireland as a religious and cultural holiday. In the dioceses of Ireland, it is both a solemnity and a holy day of obligation. It is also a celebration of Ireland itself. Sources: 2 Latin works survive which are generally accepted as having been written by St. Patrick. These are the Declaration and the Letter to the Soldiers of Caroticus, from which come the only generally accepted details of his life. The Declaration is the more biographical of the two. In it, Patrick gives a short account of his life and his mission. Most available details of his life are from subsequent hagiographies and annals, which have considerable value, but lack the empiricism scholars depend on today. Name: the only name that Patrick uses for himself in his own writings is, which gives Old Irish Patrick and Modern Irish Padraig, English Patrick, Welsh Padraig, Cornish Petarach. Hagiography records are the names he is said to have borne. Tyrcan's 7th century Collectinea gives Magnus, that is, famous; Succetus, that is, god of war; Patricius, that is, father of the citizens; Cotherthiacus, because he served 4 houses of Druids. Magnus appears in the 9th century Historia Brittonum as Maun, descending from British Magunos, meaning servant lad. Succetus, which also appears in Muirtu Mochi Mactheni's 7th century life as Sochet, is identified by Macneil as a word of British origin meaning swineherd. Cotherthiacus also appears as Catrage in the 8th century biographical poem known as Fiach's Hymn, and a variety of other spellings elsewhere, and is taken to represent a primitive Irish Catrachias. Although this is disputed, Harvey argues that Catrage has the form of a classic Old Irish tribal name, noting that Ale Coathrigi is a name for the Rock of Cashel, and the place names Cothrugu and Catrage are attested in counties Antrim and Carlow. Dating: the dates of Patrick's life are uncertain. There are conflicting traditions regarding the year of his death. His own writings provide no evidence for any dating more precise than the 5th century generally. His biblical quotations are a mixture of the Old Latin version and the Vulgate, completed in the early 5th century, suggesting he was writing at the point of transition from Old Latin to Vulgate, although it is possible the Vulgate readings may have been added later, replacing earlier readings. The letter to Caroticus implies that the Franks were still pagans at the time of writing. Their conversion to Christianity is dated to the period 496–508. The Irish annals for the 5th century date Patrick's arrival in Ireland at 432, but they were compiled in the mid-6th century at the earliest. The date 432 was probably chosen to minimize the contribution of Palladius, who was known to have been sent to Ireland in 431, and maximize that of Patrick. A variety of dates are given for his death. In 457, the elder Patrick is said to have died. This may refer to the death of Palladius, who according to the Book of Armagh was also called Patrick. In 461 halves the annals say that, here some record the repose of Patrick. In 492 thirds they record the death of Patrick, the arch-apostle of the Scotti, on the 17th of March, at the age of 120. While some modern historians accept the earlier date of circa 460 for Patrick's death, scholars of early Irish history tend to prefer a later date, circa 493. Supporting the later date, the annals record that in 553, the relics of Patrick were placed 60 years after his death in a shrine by Columba. The death of Patrick's disciple Mocta is dated in the annals to 535 or 537, and the early hagiographies all bring Patrick into contact with persons whose obits occur at the end of the 5th century or the beginning of the 6th. However, E.A. Thompson argues that none of the dates given for Patrick's death in the annals are reliable. 2 Patricks theory. Irish academic T.F. O'Rahilly proposed the 2 Patricks theory, which suggests that many of the traditions later attached to St. Patrick actually concern the aforementioned Palladius, who Prosper of Aquitaine's chronicle says was sent by Pope Celestine I as the first bishop to Irish Christians in 431. Palladius was not the only early cleric in Ireland at this time. The Irish-born Saint Kieran of Sigea lived in the later 4th century and was the first bishop of Ossory. Kieran, along with Saints Auxilius, Secundinus and Isaninus, is also associated with early churches in Munster and Leinster. By this reading, Palladius was active in Ireland until the 460s. Prosper associates Palladius' appointment with the visits of Germanus of Auxerre to Britain to suppress Pelagianism, and it has been suggested that Palladius and his colleagues were sent to Ireland to ensure that exiled Pelagians did not establish themselves among the Irish Christians. The appointment of Palladius and his fellow bishops was not obviously a mission to convert the Irish, but more probably intended to minister to existing Christian communities in Ireland. The sites of churches associated with Palladius and his colleagues are close to royal centres of the period. Secundus is remembered by Dunshaughlin, County Meath, close to the hill of Tara, which is associated with the High King of Ireland. Killashie, County Kildare, close to Naas with links with the kings of Leinster, is probably named for Auxilius. This activity was limited to the southern half of Ireland, and there is no evidence for them in Ulster or Connaught. Although the evidence for contacts with Gaul is clear, the borrowings from Latin into Old Irish show that links with Roman Britain were many. Isaninus, who appears to be of the generation of Palladius, is thought to have been a Briton, and is associated with the lands of the Uicanes Lake in Leinster. The Palladian mission should not be contrasted with later British missions, but forms a part of them, nor can the work of Palladius be uncritically equated with that of St. Patrick, as was once traditional. Life. St. Patrick was born in Roman Britain. Calpurnius, his father, was a decurion and deacon, his grandfather Petitus a Catholic priest. From Banaventa Bernii, a location otherwise unknown, though identified in one tradition as Glanaventa, modern Ravenglass in Cumbria, in what is now England. Claims have been advanced for locations in both present-day Scotland and Wales. Patrick, however, was not an active believer. According to the Confession of St. Patrick, at the age of 16 Patrick was captured by a group of Irish pirates. They took him to Ireland, where he was enslaved and held captive for 6 years. Patrick writes in the Confession that the time he spent in captivity was critical to his spiritual development. He explains that the Lord had mercy on his youth and ignorance, and afforded him the opportunity to be forgiven of his sins and converted to Christianity. While in captivity, St. Patrick worked as a shepherd and strengthened his relationship with God through prayer, eventually leading him to convert to Christianity. After 6 years of captivity, he heard a voice telling him that he would soon go home, and then that his ship was ready. Fleeing his master, he traveled to a port 200 miles away, where he found a ship and with difficulty persuaded the captain to take him. After 3 days sailing, they landed, presumably in Britain, and apparently all left the ship, walking for 28 days in a wilderness, becoming faint from hunger. After Patrick prayed for sustenance, they encountered a herd of wild boar. Since this was shortly after Patrick had urged them to put their faith in God, his prestige in the group was greatly increased. After various adventures, he returned home to his family. now in his early 20s. After returning home to Britain, St. Patrick continued to study Christianity. Patrick recounts that he had a vision a few years after returning home. I saw a man coming, as it were from Ireland. His name was Victoricus, and he carried many letters, and he gave me one of them. I read the heading, The Voice of the Irish. As I began the letter, I imagined in that moment that I heard the voice of those very people who were near the wood of Foclut, which is beside the Western Sea, and they cried out, as with one voice, We appeal to you, holy servant boy, to come and walk among us. A. B. E. Hood suggests that the Victoricus of St. Patrick's vision may be identified with St. Victricius, Bishop of Rouen in the late 4th century, who had visited Britain in an official capacity in 396. However, Ludwig Bieler disagrees. He studied in Europe principally at Auxerre, but is thought to have visited the Marmoutia Abbey, Tours, and to have received the tonsure at Léron Abbey. St. Germanus of Auxerre, a bishop of Catholic Church, ordained him a priest. Acting on the vision, Patrick returned to Ireland as a Christian missionary. According to J. B. Berry, his landing place was Wicklow, County Wicklow, at the mouth of the river Inverdea, which is now called the Vartry. Berry suggests that Wicklow was also the port through which Patrick made his escape after his 6 years' captivity, though he offers only circumstantial evidence to support this. Tradition has it that St. Patrick was not welcomed by the locals and was forced to leave to seek a more welcoming landing place further north. He rested for some days at the islands off the Skerries coast, one of which still retains the name of Inishpatrick. The first sanctuary dedicated by St. Patrick was at Saul. Shortly thereafter Benin, son of the chieftain Sexnin, joined Patrick's group. Much of the declaration concerns charges made against St. Patrick by his fellow Christians at a trial. What these charges were, he does not say explicitly, but he writes that he returned the gifts which wealthy women gave him, did not accept payment for baptisms, nor for ordaining priests, and indeed paid for many gifts to kings and judges, and paid for the sons of chiefs to accompany him. It is concluded, therefore, that he was accused of some sort of financial impropriety, and perhaps of having obtained his bishopric in Ireland with personal gain in mind. From this same evidence, something can be seen of St. Patrick's mission. He writes that he baptized thousands of people. He ordained priests to lead the new Christian communities. He converted wealthy women, some of whom became nuns in the face of family opposition. He also dealt with the sons of kings, converting them too. The Confessio is generally vague about the details of his work in Ireland, though giving some specific instances. This is partly because, as he says at points, he was writing for a local audience of Christians who knew him and his work. There are several mentions of traveling around the island, and of sometimes difficult interactions with the chiefly elite. He does claim of the Irish, never before did they know of God except to serve idols and unclean things. But now, they have become the people of the Lord, and are called children of God. The sons and daughters of the leaders of the Irish are seen to be monks and virgins of Christ. St. Patrick's position as a foreigner in Ireland was not an easy one. His refusal to accept gifts from kings placed him outside the normal ties of kinship, fosterage and affinity. Legally he was without protection. And he says that he was on one occasion beaten, robbed of all he had, and put in chains, perhaps awaiting execution. Patrick says that he was also, many years later, a captive for 60 days, without giving details. Murchius' Life of St. Patrick contains a supposed prophecy by the Druids which gives an impression of how Patrick and other Christian missionaries were seen by those hostile to them. Across the sea will come Ad's head, crazed in the head, his cloak with hole for the head, his stick bent in the head. He will chant impieties from a table in the front of his house. All his people will answer, so be it, so be it. The second piece of evidence that comes from Patrick's life is the letter to Caroticus or letter to the soldiers of Caroticus, written after a first remonstrance was received with ridicule and insult. In this, St. Patrick writes an open letter announcing that he has excommunicated Caroticus, because he had taken some of St. Patrick's converts into slavery while raiding in Ireland. The letter describes the followers of Caroticus as fellow citizens of the devils, and associates of the Scots, of Dalriada and later Argyll, and apostate Picts, based largely on an 8th century gloss. Caroticus is taken to be King Seretic of Altclut. Thompson however proposed that based on the evidence it is more likely that Caroticus was a British Roman living in Ireland. It has been suggested that it was the sending of this letter which provoked the trial which Patrick mentions in the confession. Brought to you by WikiVidi documentaries. Would you like to know more?